Good morning, everybody.
All right. Well, we're going to make this a fireside chat. And like all fireside chats, this is going to be totally unrehearsed, totally interactive. And we've known each other for, 30-some years. And I just want to start off with something that I know is on the minds of every IITian here. And as you know, all of us IITians think of ourselves as really smart guys. And we all say, well, look, he did so well. What is it about you? What made, when you left IIT Delhi in 1976, what was it about you internally? Did you have an internal compass? Was there something about you in terms of your interests and passions that made you who you are today? And how have you done that?
So first, we have a chat, not a fireside chat, because there's no fire here. As good engineers, we should be technically correct.
Yep. Yes.
What I have found is where most people go the traditional path, I won't call it the wrong path because there is no wrong path, is they do what's expected of them. Any class I speak to, I always say 95% of you will end up doing what's expected of you by others. And by the way, there's a lot of demands on my time. Why do I come to a conference like that? Only for one reason. If out of this audience, I can get one person to do things differently and ask a different set of questions, to me, attending a session like this is worth my time because it helps somebody. So it did help you. 5 years later, send me an email, because I get these emails about what I talked about in 1995 and how it made some difference. So that is my motivation. I never speak just for the sake of speaking, but I have a very clear goal. So let me speak to those of you who won't do what's expected. And when I graduated, as you asked, my parents had expectations. My colleagues expected I'd take a job. My friends expected I'd take a job. And I decided to do something completely different that nobody thought was reasonable, that nobody wanted. And I wasn't trying to be radical. I had an internal compass that said, go do this. And I said, I'm young enough, why shouldn't I do this? So when you ask the question, why shouldn't you do something, you come up with different answers than if you ask the question, why should you? And almost everybody asks why you should, but nobody asks why you shouldn't. Because one thing is a tautology. As good engineers, again, I like to be technically accurate. Every single time in your life you choose to do something, you're choosing not to do something else. My wife once, we used to argue, she'd say, we should have the kids learn Hindi. And I'd say, okay, then what shouldn't they learn? And she said, no, they can do everything in addition. And I always have this, every time you commit your time to doing something, you are making the choice to not do something else. Most people accept a job. I asked the question, what should I be doing? I said, I want to start a company. So I had an internal compass, so we can talk more about that.
Yes,
it's a very big passion of mine. And I find most people, 95% of people, don't do that. Maybe 99% don't do that. And I'd like to walk away today with each of you at least examining that question for yourself, because nobody else can do it.
So let's talk about that, starting a company. Here we are, talking about 1976, you're leaving India. I mean, that was not exactly a hotbed of entrepreneurialism at that time, or even technology at that time. And yet you decided that you got to start a company. Was that, by the way, was that in India, or was that when you got here? Or was it really something that happened? That's an important question. How did you get there?
When I was probably 15 or 16, I used to live in Delhi Cantonment. Used to go every weekend to Chandni Chowk and rent old magazines, right? Because old, like Electronic Engineering Times, you could rent for the week in Chandni Chowk. It was usually a year or two old.
Yes.
But sometimes you got recent issues. And I'd come back and read it because I was curious about what was going on in technology.
Okay.
And I read about Andy Grove starting a company, and I said, here's this Hungarian immigrant starting a company in Silicon Valley. Why can't I do that? I'd never known anybody in business. My dad was in the Indian Army, so I only knew Army people. And so I asked myself the question. And since then, I've always asked, why not? And I've never had a good reason to not start a company. You know, people ask me, I've never found a good reason for anybody with imagination to work for a big company. I just can't rationalize why people do that. Okay. Now, I will tell you, different people are different. And for some people, it may be appropriate because they have a different personality than mine. But if you have my personality, there's no reason to work in a big company. And frankly, there's people who have other things to do, so 9 to 5 works really well for them because they have too many other interests. So given a personality, decide what you want to do. What bothers me is the people who decide what they want to do and then never do it. I've had so many people come to me and say they wanted to start a company all their life, but they never have the guts to do it. Because you always give up something when you do something else. And frankly, every interesting path in the world, no exceptions, big company, small company, involves risk. Most people don't like risk, and hence most people don't do anything interesting.
So let me probe on that last point about the starting a company. I heard 3 different things in that answer.
Talk about
in terms of underlying motivations. Number 1, you wanted to be different from others. You wanted to try things that were different.
Well, I never wanted to be different from others. It never bothered me what others were doing.
I didn't mean, I meant, you know, you want to be able to row your own path. You had your own internal compass, let's put it this way. You wanted to follow your own true north, so to speak. So number 1. Number 2, you didn't want to work for anybody else, from what I can tell, and probably that does fit in your personality. That's fine, you know, so that's good.
I figured if I worked for anybody else, I'd get fired.
Okay, great. And by the way, that's exactly what, you know, entrepreneurs feel that way. And there was a third thing I heard, and that had to do with technology. I mean, you read about technology, et cetera. Take me through those. How much of that technology side really drove this decision as opposed to the other 2?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a history, which I don't normally talk about. I was probably 12 when I realized that pundits in India are scams. They're scam artists. Right? I haven't seen better crooks than pundits. And generally, religion, which was invented for one purpose, has been subverted for a completely different purpose. Right? And so at the age of 12, my only goal was to fight pundits. And my mom never took me near a temple. You know, and I like to be considerate of others, but not if they're scamming other people. You know, if you don't give me this much money, bad luck will happen. You know, you have to blame the victim, the religious people, for submitting to that scam. But the point is, I then decided I needed a different religion, and the only religion I've ever had is technology.
Wonderful. Well said. Well said.
And look, if you look at the origins of religion, it was really meant to be a societal good. And the biggest societal good we have today is technology.
Yeah.
In fact, for those of you who love religion, most major wars in history of humankind anywhere in the planet have been fought over religion. So my favorite all-time saying, not the question you asked, is all this hate, all for the love of God. It's silly. Israel, Palestine, Iranians, Shiites, Sunnis, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, just it's all this hate just for what's supposed to be the love of God. You know, if it was genuine love of God, it'd be different. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to go off there.
No, love of technology.
So technology is my religion.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about religion too. I don't talk a lot publicly about it, but I do think, and if somebody has a question on religion, I'll be happy to answer it. I'm not shy of any questions. The other religion I follow is a Stanford professor called Sam Harris. Read his stuff if you want to understand religion.
Now, I want you to know that the typical rules of social etiquette normally say you shouldn't talk about religion and not politics. You've already broken both of those. But that's fine. Please.
Again, I don't much care what other people think, so I express my views.
Good.
And I've always done that.
All right.
I may be the only person to get in school and even in IIT to actually have physical fights with my teachers.
Wow.
I never tolerated abuse.
Yeah.
I abuse people back.
Yeah.
But technology is one of the greatest tools we have that all of you have to uplift humanity. It is absolutely the necessary tool that it's never sufficient by itself because politics can screw up technology.
Yeah.
So it's necessary but not sufficient. And so you have to worry about other things. But if you look at the planet today, maybe 500 million people, maybe 700 million people live a rich lifestyle, mostly in the Western world. People with energy-rich lifestyle, air conditioners and big cars, resource-rich lifestyle, big houses, lots of cement produced, all these things, lots of food going waste in the house. 7 billion people want the same standard of living. We do not have 10 times the number of resources. We don't have 10 times the number of amount of energy, 10 times the amount of steel, 10 times the amount of cement, 10 times the amount of food. We just don't have it. No matter what the politics are, politics deals with distribution of what we have. Technology can multiply resources 10x. For the same energy, I can produce 10 times the amount of light. Yeah. For the same gasoline, I can go 10 times further. For the same land, I can go produce 10 times more food. Technology is the greatest resource multiplier, and for those of us who are technologists who had the privilege of going to IIT, we have an obligation to use that well. Sorry to get
no, this is perfect.
Religious punditry for a minute.
This is, this is a perfect segue to a question that I've been wanting to ask, and I've heard you speak, and you've said oftentimes, the best changes in technology or building a company oftentimes occur at the edges of an ecosystem. You've also said, I think typically 5% of the people are the ones who are going to make changes to society through technology. Tell me what you mean by that, and how does that, tell me a little bit about it.
My multiplier thing take jobs, and we can talk about jobs,
Yeah.
because I actually think they'll mostly disappear over 50 years.
Yeah.
But if 5% of the people are entrepreneurial, they can create enough goods and services, enough jobs, enough product to support 20 other people. That's why you don't need everybody to do this. You still need the people. Like KK is here, I believe, Raghava, I don't know if he's in the audience. You need the creative person. You still need people to do things. And the ideal state for humanity is where entertainment is the main thing people do. Get entertained or entertain. So my point is, entrepreneurs can really leverage the ecosystem. Technology can really leverage the ecosystem. And that's really exciting, because people always say, most people won't do that. Well, most people don't have to do that. A few people have to do that. You know, one person can create 1,000 jobs. And that's why entrepreneurs are so important to social good and society. And frankly, they benefit financially, personally, right. And that's a good thing. I'm a big fan of that, too. So take an example. I'll give you one of my favorite examples. This is probably, in my life, about 4 or 5 years old. For those of you who know, my wife works on nonprofit education, seeker12.org. She works probably 80 hours a week trying to make education as a free resource globally. And many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, which is many for me, I was looking at what else could we do. We get lots of requests to give donations for this or that, and frankly, most of them are very well-intentioned, but they're not multipliers. And I always look at what will multiply, which is why I got involved in microfinance and with Professor Yunus in the 1990s, okay. Yeah. Right? Because there was a 10x multiplier. And I'm big on multiplication. Engineers like amplification.
Yeah.
And I looked at healthcare in India. I was thinking of what could you do in nonprofit in healthcare in India. And I actually went through the exercise. To have 10 times more doctors, which would provide an adequate level of care, you needed 10 times the number of engineering schools, medical schools. And you needed 10 times the number of medical school professors. So I went through this whole exercise. If you had all the money in the world, in 20 or 30 years, could you provide good health care to everybody in India? And the answer was, no, you can't. It would take 50 years to do it if you could start 10 times the number of medical schools. And so I said, oh, okay, there's a different solution. And that's when I got interested in healthcare. And I'm now convinced that you can provide much better care than I can get at Stanford Hospital in rural India. In fact, higher quality care at 1/10 the price, maybe 1/100 the price. Why? Because technology leverage can achieve that. I can't even remotely imagine why I would talk to a doctor about any diagnosis or treatment in 15, 20 years. It's not going to happen, right? Because they're human beings, because I haven't met a doctor. If I have a heart condition, I haven't had a doctor who's read the last 5,000 research papers on heart. Or if I have cancer, I haven't met the doctor who knows the last 5,000 research papers on cancer. Google knows that. The new machine learning decision systems. And that's not saying humans have no role, but they don't have a role in diagnosis. They don't have a role in prescribing therapy. They don't have a role in monitoring your progress. The role they have is the human connection, which is always important. But then, and I had this conversation 2 months ago with the dean of the medical school at Harvard, they have to change their admissions criteria on who to admit. I know I'm wandering far afield from your question.
No problem.
Because if they're selecting for that role, they have to select the most empathetic humans, not the highest IQ people. Yeah. And we know the highest IQ people don't always have the highest EQ.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very true, very true.
So anybody who gets into Stanford or Harvard Med School probably isn't optimized for EQ. The stuff people need most from doctors. So the whole admissions process is wrong. I want to illustrate one other thing. No matter where you are, what area you work in, you can take conventional wisdom, which exists in medicine, or you can use logic and first principles. You can ask anybody, how do you improve medicine, healthcare? Train more doctors, start more medical schools. All wrong. How do you improve education? Well, spend more money, reduce classroom size, open more schools. Wrong. There's better ways to do it with new technology. Right. Twitter does and Facebook do such a good job of getting 3-4 hours from every teenager every single day in a highly engaged fashion. Yeah. The tens of thousands of dollars we spend per pupil in this country can't get 15 engaged minutes a day from the average student.
So, great. So I want to, again, on that question, you've painted a very interesting picture as clearly somebody who truly believes in technology, really as a religion, I can tell, that ultimately it is possible, you could paint a picture, that one day technology will account for 5%, and then 95% is being entertained or educating or doing other things. By the way, it's not unreasonable. After all, one day 100% used to be all agriculture, and today less than 5% is agriculture, so why can we not make that for technology? I get it. But I'd like to probe a little bit on this question of what the other people will do for a second. Because there's a lot of folks here who are obviously technologists, who are going to build companies, who are really, really interested in building it. But there are doctors, there are artists, there are educators, there are other people. And yes, many of them will entertain. But even to entertain, as you correctly said, you need a Facebook that does innovation. Innovation that isn't always just the technology side of building better web pages, but how to make money through advertising in a certain way. By the way, Google did the same thing with click advertising, et cetera. So talk a little bit about this innovation that occurs in the business model section, in all these other things that are just as important to an investor like you.
Yeah. Innovation is one of my favorite things. Technology-driven innovation, and they're different things. Innovation can happen without technology. Walmart did that a while ago. They just changed the model of retailing. Many other people have done that. Yep. Some for good purposes, some not for such good purposes. Red Bull did a great job of innovating people into having more caffeine. Yeah. Look, innovation is just fun because it's new and interesting, right? 2, the right innovation, especially business innovation, creates new goods and services. Yes. Right? Whether it's a better Greek yogurt or a better smoothie or a better retailing model like Walmart, that's great innovation. What I understand is technology innovation, and Professor Yunus did a great job of innovating financial services. And by the way, he did that because he started from first principles, asked fundamental questions. And I've gotten to know him pretty well. But technology innovation can innovate and multiply resources. A better LED light does make the same electricity produce 5 times more light today. That's real innovation.
Right.
And in fact, one of our entrepreneurs doing that won the Nobel Prize for Physics last November. A really exciting time for me to see that kind of innovation being rewarded. I don't know what we want to talk about. Let me just say, innovation takes people who are operating at the edges of systems. If I start changing healthcare by changing a hospital, it's very hard. You start on the edges of a system. And you know, when I had a long sabbatical, it was about 14 years ago, I became a postgraduate at the Santa Fe Institute doing complex systems theory. I'm interested in all things that are knowledge and education. My kids loved it, by the way, because for 6 months before, I had a math PhD from Stanford come for 3 hours every night and tutor me in advanced math because complex systems theory required I know it. It's hard to do when you're 45, 50 years old. Okay. Go back to assignments. Yes. But if you look at it, systems are very solid at their core. They're away from the core, they're very chaotic. The right place to operate in that transition between frozen systems, where tradition rules, experience rules, and experience, by the way, is same as biases. So biases rule, and there's no fundamental question asking that I'm urging you to do. And then there's the out there, and there's people trying to mine asteroids for materials. At the edge between chaos and solidly frozen, well-established system is where things are a little bit ungelled. I find innovation happens best there.
So these folks here in this room, many of them are entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, and they're obviously asking the question, okay, so let's say I've got technology. I've got the next greatest algorithm for, I don't know, pick anything you want, search, or maybe medical diagnosis, anything. And it's all technology-driven from there on. What else do they have to innovate in? What have you found as a successful investor that you need?
So let me come back to that question.
Yeah,
I want to talk about one other thing, since there's a very large diversity in the people here.
Yeah, right.
So let's come back to your question. Let me say the following. First, innovation never happens in a big company. That's material innovation. Incremental innovation does happen. Corning did invent a better glass for the iPhone. To me, that's incremental. Most of you didn't even realize the glass was different, right, but it doesn't crack as easily. Mm-hmm. Gorilla Glass. And then there's real radical innovation. No large company has ever been successful that I know, and I'm sure there's a few exceptions. But 95% of all large innovation, maybe all of it, comes from small entrepreneurial companies that rethink the problem. Walmart didn't innovate retail, Amazon did. NASA and Lockheed did not innovate space, SpaceX did. General Motors, though they'd worked on electric cars, and so had Volkswagen and BMW for decades, didn't innovate electric cars. Elon Musk did. Tesla did. NBC and ABC did not innovate media. Okay. YouTube did. So no matter where you look, I actually went through this exercise of trying to find innovation. Real innovation, not incremental innovation.
I think that's the key, is you're making a distinction between, quote, real or disruptive
refinement of a product,
as opposed to incremental.
Right? Why? Because there's too much experience inside big companies and too much tradition. Experience, tradition, come back to no first principles thinking and a lot of biases of how things are done, and so they inhibit innovation. The thing I want to leave with all of you, anybody here in agriculture? Okay. The point I want to make is there is no area I have found that's not subject to innovation. People think it's all in, if you're an electrical engineer or a computer scientist, and it's all about internet and mobile and those kinds of things. We have a Stanford professor who quit his job, gave up a Howard Hughes Fellowship to say, I'm going to innovate and replace all beef on the planet. 1/3 of the land area, usable land area of our planet, is used for animal husbandry of one sort or another.
Of course, he won't have much of a market in India.
He will. I'll tell you why. He decided that environmentally, raising animals for food is very, very bad. So he decided to replicate the exact taste of food. Meat, chicken, red meat is the hardest to replicate. And red meat is what people love the most. It's the fastest growing category in food, because as people get better income in India and China, they spend it on red meat. Well, he decided that plant proteins and lots of high tech can be used to innovate. So he probably has 30 PhDs working on replicating a burger with only plant proteins and plant stuff. Good. Now, who would have imagined that's open to innovation?
Actually, I'll change my mind. That would be a great market in India.
Right?
I think that'll be the best veggie burger you could find, you know.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
It's not a veggie burger. It's a burger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Good. So we've got time for a few questions.
So my point is, no matter where you are, you are open to innovation. My favorite new example is construction is a very old business. And I've actually seen some people start to 3D print houses.
Wow.
Now it sounds ridiculous today. In 10 years, it probably won't.
Great. We have time for a few more questions, and I have a few trending up there from the audience. So I'm just going to ask them, the ones that are
I talk a lot and take too much time.
That's fine. This is great. Very interesting indeed. Talking about tech, I'll start. There are two questions. One of them is really, everybody says, are we in a tech bubble? What do you think?
Look, it's not an interesting question.
Okay. You want to go to the next one?
No, but I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
There's probably some journalists there, and their job is to fill up pages, right? The only job a journalist has is how many column inches they get on what page of the newspaper or online, right? Reporting, and frankly, everything I say, it applies to 80% of the people in the profession. 20% of the people in every position are very good, very well-intentioned, doing the right things for the right reason. The problem is the 80%. The model for journalism today is guaca, right? They care about getting the story out. And I do have a goal to obsolete journalists, because something like 30 million stories last year were written entirely by computers. The first sports story you read after a game is actually written entirely by computer. things like narrative science. No human touches the story. You think it's written by a journalist. But their goal is one, which is write a story so you can sell advertising, right? It's not reporting the facts.
Right.
So I don't know how I got there.
Don't worry about it. You know what?
But I do want to make another point that's also really important. I want to go back to the internal compass issue because it's a big thing.
Yeah.
I would guess 80–90% of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies in this country, these are guys who are supposed to be leaders, and I say supposed to be, spend more time reading the press and responding to it than saying what do they believe in. You know, a good English major can write a story. They can't decide the strategy for a Fortune 500 company, but they have to write a story. They write a story. They love stories that are controversial. And then CEOs respond. You shouldn't be responding to those stories. You should be laughing at them, finding them entertaining. But their intent is different. Every story's main intent is to sell advertising. Every story comes with a bias. If they were reporting the facts, there'd be no difference between the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and what they report. Because they report different things, it's catering to their audience so they can sell advertising. But your internal compass should look past that, not be externally influenced, and I urge all of you to think about that hard. Sorry about that.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent.
Another important point to make.
So are there another question that people are asking are, you know, you've been there in the forefront of the various tech revolutions. We met when you were starting Sun, and I was at Oracle at that time. You were there after that in the early days of the internet, and of course now in the last 15 years with solar and really energy and et cetera. What are some of the trends that you see going forward over the next, say, 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
Or possibly longer if you think, but certainly the rest of your lifetime, let's say, or our lifetime.
Yeah, and that brings up a couple of interesting things. Obviously, it's interesting to talk about what's next.
Yeah.
But it's also, I just tell you a little bit of insight. Probably every 4 to 5 years, I go deep into an area I know nothing about. And I just learn as if I'm back in school, and I usually spend 2 years learning a new area. Right? Because I get bored.
Okay.
Right? But it also keeps me more entertained. I love working. I turned 60 this year, and I literally said, at least for the next 25 years, health permitting, health's the only caveat, I'm going to be working 80 hours a week. Why? Because every single hour is interesting. If I have to go see a movie, I say, oh, I can't do something else that's really, really interesting. Somebody's really interesting business idea, or a great new technical paper, right? And so this, every time you do something, including watch a movie, there's something you're choosing not to do. So I'm always looking to reinvent myself, not because I want to reinvent myself, because that's not a goal. It's to not get bored with something old and find something new to do, something new to learn. And so that leads to your question of what else is interesting. And it leads back to the answer, almost every area is interesting for technology innovation. I'm all into reinventing food now. If you buy a product called Just Mayo at Costco or Safeway or Whole Foods, it's reinvented the egg in the last 3 years. Okay? Done by somebody who practically dropped out of high school in Alabama. Now he has a bunch of PhDs working for him, looking at machine learning. And by the way, doing an egg is mostly a machine learning problem on protein properties. So they're mostly using deep learning and machine learning and math to reinvent the egg, to characterize the properties of proteins so you can replicate the properties of an egg without having an egg, right? So food is very interesting because it's both a large part of our lives, a large part of what's wrong with our food system and our health, a large part of cruelty to animals, which is sort of a passion of mine too. It's a large part of land usage and environmental damage here and in China and in India. So food is really interesting, and it is really subject to science and computer science. Okay. Machine learning is very interesting. I think when the first steam engine was invented, we started competing with human beings in anything that required muscle power. What else can humans do? Humans can also think in sophisticated ways. All of that, over time, or most of that at least, will be replicated by machines and machine learning systems. What's the best diagnosis for a person? What's the best treatment? How to read a radiology image? Those are simple machine learning problems, right? We even have a company trying to say, if you get sued, how do you constitute a defense, right? That's a machine learning problem. You rely on a lawyer to come up with cases and examples, but that's a manual way of doing things. So I have a hard time figuring out what machines won't be able to do. And so that's a really interesting area for those of you looking to reinvent. And by the way, if you want to reinvent, start by thinking about yourself differently. Change your hairstyle. Change your clothes. Look, you have to change your context to think differently. It's so easy to fall back into your old experience, which is your old biases. So those areas are interesting. Having said that, almost every area, reinventing healthcare, really interesting area. I've been doing a lot. But I probably read 300-400 papers in healthcare. What was wrong with the system, what the state-of-the-art research was, why it wasn't getting deployed, before I started working on digital health. I actually went back to machine learning textbooks that my son was using at Stanford. And I read all the textbooks about 3 years ago. Yeah. Right? I just read the algorithms, played with them. So those are interesting areas, but frankly, I want to go back and say, almost every area is open for innovation when we don't think about it. Okay. Transportation. I love what can happen in transportation. I've now decided public transportation is a really bad idea. Why is it a bad idea? It was a really good idea till a year ago, right? But in the face of driverless cars, to have 80,000-ton buses and train compartments driving to carry 3 people at 3 a.m. at night is a silly idea. Spending in rigid patterns when you don't know where jobs will be in 20 years, and we know it shifts from the Silicon Valley to San Francisco to somewhere else, building rails and things is a bad idea. You're locking in things rigidly in. Driverless cars will go anywhere, anytime, way cheaper than public transportation. Way cheaper. Right? So reinventing public transportation, reinventing how we build houses. I'd love to do that. I've been very intrigued with that. So all those areas are open.
Wonderful. Well, this could go on for a long time. You have been incredibly inspiring and, frankly, very interesting discussions. But all of you, I'm sure when you heard it here, the next areas to focus on reinventing technology, reinventing transportation, reinventing healthcare, reinventing food technology, reinventing housing, all of them. But ultimately, the key is reinventing. And the master reinventor of all, Vinod Khosla.
So can I finish with
please.
2 thoughts?
Yes, of course. No problem.
Let me, most people live most of their life trying to make more money. And there's good reason for it. But frankly, after you reach a base level, and that base is very low, and statistical surveys say it's at about, in this country, about $80,000 a year or so, the most rewarding thing is actually to work on meaningful things. What makes you happiest, many surveys prove that, I can tell you, doing things that make a difference, that make an impact. They don't have to be nonprofit. They can be nonprofit. They can be for-profit. That's a really rewarding way to make yourself happy if your goal is happiness. And so let me leave everybody with that message. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.